Hi, and welcome to EnviroCentre's Green Room. Meet the people on the front lines of climate action and find out what keeps them up at night. I'm Andy, and this week we're joined by Julia Robinson, Project Manager for the City of Ottawa Climate Change and Resiliency Unit. Welcome, Julia.
Hi, Mandy. Nice to see you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks very much.
We ask all our guests to bring one environmental fact to share. What have you brought with you today?
So today what I wanted to talk about is about Ottawa's future climate conditions. So how our weather conditions, our climate is expected to change over the decades. And in a nutshell, we can think about this as we're going to get hotter, wetter, and wilder. So I work in the City of Ottawa's Climate Change and Resiliency Unit, and our team is responsible for implementing the city's climate change master plan. So one of the things that we did, we finished last year, was a joint study that we did together with the National Capital Commission, and we worked with climate scientists, and we had advice from Environment and Climate Change Canada to really use climate modeling to look at how Ottawa and the region's weather conditions are going to change over the next 30, 50, and 100 years. So I wanted to give a little bit of a snapshot of what that picture looks like. And so I'm going to share some examples around what by the 2050s, so in about 30 years or so, what we should be expecting. So first of all, in terms of temperature, the region is going to be overall 3 degrees warmer. And specifically in terms of the number of days above 30 degrees. So our hot days that, depending on when you're listening to this, Ottawa's just come out of one, we're really going to have an increase in the number of those hot days. So as an example, on average, we tend to have 11 of these extreme heat days per year. By the 2050s, we're looking at around 43 per year, so 4 times as many. In terms of the weather, we're going to see more rain, but this rain is going to be distributed unequally. And the unequal patterns are going to happen both in terms of seasonally. So the rain is going to fall more in winter, in spring and fall, and not in the summertime. And we're also going to see when the rain does come, it's going to come more intense. We're going to have those heavier rainstorms to deal with. And the last point, the wilder point, is more around the unpredictability and the variability that we're going to need to be prepared for in terms of our weather. So while we need to prepare for heavy rains, we also have to be prepared for low water conditions and the potential for drought. And then alongside with that is the likelihood of extreme events. So in the last couple of years, we've seen the high winds and the tornadoes, we've seen the flooding that's happened, and we have to be prepared for events like this. So if anyone's interested in more information about that study, the full study findings and the underlining data and some summaries are all available on the city's website. And I would encourage people to go to ottawa.ca, climate change, or to look on Engage Ottawa for more information.
Thank you. I think it's so important to know what to expect for a region and what the city is focusing on. So that was a really helpful overview. So moving on, what climate problem keeps you up at night?
So I think with climate change and the impacts, we often think about the extreme events. These are the events that get the headlines, the floods, the tornadoes, the wildfires. And indeed, if you are directly affected by these events are devastating. But what I'm also really concerned about is the more gradual changes in temperature and precipitation and how that's going to affect our community, our economy, and our environment, our ecosystems. I mentioned some stats around extreme heat. And extreme heat affects everybody, but there are certain people that are much more vulnerable or much more affected to extreme heat conditions. So the very young or the older, people who have existing health conditions, people who work outside, athletes, and of course, people who are homeless or who are precariously housed. So I am really concerned about our rising temperatures and the rising numbers of those extreme heat days. In terms of rainfall and our increases, I think about whether our infrastructure is going to be able to handle this additional precipitation. So for the city, of course, our older infrastructure wasn't designed for these future conditions. And we need to think about how we adapt our infrastructure, for example, to prevent flooding. And then finally, I think about the seasonal shifts and how that's going to affect our environment. So we know that we will be getting shorter, warmer winters. There'll be earlier springs and later falls. And these gradual shifts really create the conditions for new invasive species or new pests. And these are things that can harm, they can either bring disease that affects people, but also things that can harm our trees and our forests. So, these are kind of the range of things that I think about late at night.
Those are big buckets of things to keep you up at night.
Absolutely.
So keeping those in mind, of course, and also the information that you started with, what is the solution?
Yeah, I think we all have to focus on the solutions. I think with climate change, it's easy to just feel like there's nothing that we can do about it and to get really worried. And don't get me wrong, we need to be worried. We need to be thinking about this and making change. But there are actions that we can take. So we need to take actions that both reduce our emissions as well as actions to prepare for the changing weather conditions. So one way of thinking about this is we need to avoid the unmanageable and manage the unavoidable. So in terms of avoiding the unmanageable, this is all the really important collective action to reduce our emissions, to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees, and really create the best possible future scenario for the world and also for Ottawa. But we also need to manage the unavoidable. And this is where we need to take steps now to prepare for the changes that are already happening in our climate and are going to continue happening in the future. So I wanted to just mention a couple of things that the City of Ottawa is doing to start that preparation and to work towards a solution. So first, we're developing a climate resiliency strategy. And this is a strategy that will help us understand where and how Ottawa is vulnerable to climate change and identify actions we can address to really to address those highest climate risks. So we are in the middle, we're currently undertaking a vulnerability and risk assessment right now. And I'll talk a little bit later about how people can get involved in that process. And sort of just in the big picture, what that helps us understand is where is Ottawa vulnerable? Who is vulnerable? And we take a look at our current climate adaptation efforts and say, is it enough or do we need to be doing more? Where should we prioritize our efforts? And as part of developing the strategy, the city will look at actions that we can take, but also ways that we can work together with partners, with businesses, with institutions, and support the community to take the action that we all need to take to prepare for change. The second action that I wanted to just mention is that as a city, we are starting to apply a climate lens to all city decisions. So this means considering climate issues, and in this case, it's both climate mitigation as well as adaptation, in the city's major plans, in our programs, and our purchases or investments. So right now, one of the big focuses that are happening in the city is the renewal of our official plan. So climate issues are front and center in that official plan as we're considering how we grow and develop as a city. We're also integrating climate considerations in our asset management plans. These are the city's major plans that look at how we manage and make choices around our existing infrastructure. And then, of course, it affects all elements of city business. So emergency planning, of course, would be another area that we're thinking about it, or any really key financial decision the cities make. So those are a couple of examples of what the city is doing to find a solution. And I think individuals, businesses, organizations, everybody should also be thinking about where they are vulnerable and what actions we can take to prepare for those risks.
Yeah, applying the climate lens kind of across the board seems to be kind of an overarching theme with everyone because it really is applicable to everything that we do.
Absolutely.
So based on the solutions that you've mentioned, what's in the way?
I think in my mind, it really comes down to competing priorities. And this is something that affects everybody, whether you're an individual and you're making choices about you or your family, whether you're a business, or whether you're a government. We all have limited budgets and have to make choices around that. For the city, a key issue is our aging infrastructure and the gaps that we have in terms of keeping that infrastructure to provide for key services. The city's also under a housing emergency, and there are many other issues that we need to look at and we need to address in terms of inequities in terms of our city as a whole. And of course, on top of that, in the last year and a bit, we've been dealing with the challenge of COVID. So competing priorities are nothing new, and it's natural to focus on the immediate priorities, but we really need to think about investments and choices we can make now to help us prepare for the future. And that is what we mean when we talk about building resiliency to future climate risks.
So I think you've mentioned a few things that folks can do to help, but if you just want to expand on how can people help?
Sure. And there really are ways that we can all take action and we can help. I'll do a shameless plug right now. As part of developing the climate resiliency strategy, we'd love to hear from as many different people as possible. The city has a couple of surveys out right now. There's a survey for individuals, and there's also a survey for businesses, organizations, and institutions. And we want to hear from you. So how have you been affected by climate change? What are you most concerned about? What do you think some of the solutions are? So please, I would encourage people to go to Engage Ottawa and share your thoughts and your views on the city surveys. But there's also, of course, actions that everybody can take either individually or as a business or as an organization. And I want to re-emphasize that actions to reduce emissions are really important. And I know that many organizations, and EnviroCentre is one of them, has lots of tips of things that we can do to reduce our contribution to climate change. But today I really want to talk about actions that we can all take to prepare for the changing climate and the changing weather patterns. So in terms of some ideas, prepare an emergency plan, and this can be for you and your family, for your community, or for your business. And the city does have resources to support you on this on our emergency preparedness page. Another sort of practical step is installing a backwater valve or a sump pump. Again, these are really important things that protect your home for future flooding and prevents the risks of that. And the city has a program called the Residential Protective Plumbing Program, and there are rebates that are offered to help recoup some of the costs associated with that. Another example would be looking at ways to manage rainwater on your property. And this can be really as simple as making sure your downspouts are going onto your grass or onto a garden, as opposed to running onto your driveway and right into the sewer system. And again, there's a new program the city has. It's called Rain Ready Ottawa. And there's a bunch of information about things that you can take. And there are also some direct supports for residents in our priority areas where we know that stormwater management is a real problem. And I guess the final one I wanted to add was just shade. Trees, trees, trees. We know how important our trees are to providing relief and reducing what we call the urban heat island effect, or the temperature that we're feeling. So everything that we can each do to protect our existing trees and plant new ones for the future are really, really key. So those are just a few suggestions. I know for myself, it's summertime, the weather is nice. So I'm starting to look at what kind of DIY projects I'm going to do for myself and at my place. And so perhaps it's the right time to undertake one of these projects.
Thank you. That was a great list. So with all of that in mind, with the role that you play at the city and just, your own life and your experiences, what is the good future?
So the good future in my mind is one where everybody, and that's governments, it's businesses, it's residents, we're all working towards holding our global temperatures, those increases down to that really critical 1.5 degree thresholds that all of our global scientists talk about. So we're working to hold those temperatures down and reduce our emissions. And we're also taking steps to prepare for that change that's inevitable. So remember that phrase that I said earlier, we need to avoid the unmanageable and manage the unavoidable. I mentioned a few things that the city's doing, and I am encouraged by the steps that we're taking as a city to really embed and build climate change into all of our decisions. But for each of us, I think that means taking steps to protect our homes, our families, our businesses, and indeed the broader community. And I think I would just say that one of the things I think the pandemic has shown us is that we can all act in really unexpected ways. And as a community, we've shown that we can be resilient. And I'd like to think that we can use that as a foundation and harness that energy to take the action that we need to do on climate change.
That's it for this week's Green Room. Thanks so much for joining us as we get to the heart of climate action. You can find out more about our work and sign up for our newsletter at EnviroCentre.ca. Follow us on your favorite podcast app or subscribe on YouTube. See you next time.